December 6, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Everything seemed normal. But at that exact moment, 353 Japanese aircraft were only 8 hours away. Here's what makes this truly shocking. The United States had already intercepted Japanese messages. They knew war was imminent. They even knew an attack was coming that weekend. So why were American battleships sitting in the harbor like ducks in a barrel? Today, we're diving into the intelligence failures, the missed warnings, and the split-second decisions that turned a quiet Sunday morning into the deadliest day in U.S. naval history. Because the real story of Pearl Harbor? It's so much worse than you think. Let me paint you a picture of what December 6th looked like in Hawaii. It's Saturday night. Sailors from the Pacific Fleet are on leave in Honolulu, hitting bars, going to movies, dancing, unwinding. Back on the ships, guys are playing poker, writing letters home, listening to the radio. On the USS Arizona, the ship's band is practicing for a Battle of the Bands competition scheduled for Sunday afternoon. From above, Pearl Harbor looked like the perfect defensive location, a natural deep-water harbor, protected on all sides. The ideal place to anchor the entire Pacific Fleet, and that's exactly what was there. 8 battleships, 8 cruisers, 30 destroyers, 4 submarines, nearly 400 aircraft, all packed into one harbor. The U.S. Navy believed Pearl Harbor was practically untouchable because it was 4,000 miles from Japan. But while American sailors slept, U.S. cryptanalysts in Washington were reading Japan's diplomatic communications. By late 1941, codebreakers had cracked Japan's purple cipher. And what they were reading was alarming. Throughout November and early December, intercepted messages showed Japan preparing for war. Diplomatic negotiations were collapsing. Something major was coming. On November 27th, 10 days before the attack, the War Department sent a warning to Hawaii. This dispatch is to be considered a war warning, hostile action possible at any moment. 10 days of warning. Then on December 2nd, U.S. intelligence detected that the Japanese fleet had gone completely radio silent. They had vanished. And if you're a military commander and your enemy's entire navy suddenly disappears right after a war warning, what do you think is about to happen? This brings us to the commanders in Hawaii. Admiral Husband Kimmel, in charge of the Pacific Fleet. General Walter Short, in charge of the Army forces. Both were responsible for defending Pearl Harbor, but the two weren't coordinating effectively. In 1941, the Army and Navy ran almost independently, with different priorities and separate intelligence channels. It was a bureaucratic mess, so when warnings arrived from Washington, they were vague, contradictory, and incomplete. They stated that hostile action was possible, but didn't specify where. Many believed Japan would strike south toward the oil fields of Southeast Asia. An attack on Hawaii across 4,000 miles of open ocean seemed impossible, but 230 miles north of Hawaii, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo had other plans. 6 aircraft carriers, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled, had been sailing in total radio silence for 12 days. They had taken a northern route through terrible Pacific weather specifically to avoid detection, and it had worked. So let's talk about that Sunday morning. Because even in the final hours before the attack, there were chances to stop this. Multiple chances, and each one was missed. Opportunity 1. The Ward incident. 3:42 in the morning. The destroyer U.S. Ward is patrolling the entrance to Pearl Harbor. They spot something in the water. A periscope. A Japanese midget submarine trying to sneak into the harbor ahead of the air attack. The Ward doesn't hesitate. They open fire. A direct hit. The submarine sinks. This is the warning. At 6:53 a.m., the Ward sends a message to Naval Headquarters. We have attacked, fired upon, and dropped depth charges on a submarine operating in the defensive sea area. The first shot of the Pacific War was fired at 3:42 a.m., more than 4 hours before the air attack. So what does Headquarters do with this information? They debate whether it's real. Maybe it was a false alarm. Could have been a whale. Let's wait for confirmation. They're still discussing it when the bombs start falling. Opportunity 2. The radar detection. Now we get to the most infamous missed warning of them all. 7:02 a.m. Two Army privates, Joseph Lockard and George Elliott, are operating a mobile radar station at Opana Point on the northern tip of Oahu. They're supposed to shut it down at 7, but Lockard wants to give Elliott more practice, so they keep it running. Then they see it. The largest radar return either of them has ever witnessed. Something massive is heading toward Hawaii, 137 miles out, and closing fast. Elliott wants to report it immediately. Lockard agrees. At 7:20, they call the information center at Fort Shafter, but everyone has gone to breakfast. The only person there is a young lieutenant named Kermit Tyler. It's only his second shift on the job. The privates tell him, "We've got a large flight of planes coming in from the north, really large." And Tyler replies, "Don't worry about it." To be fair to him, he had been told that B-17 bombers were arriving from California that morning. He assumed that's what the radar was seeing, but here's what he didn't know. The B-17s were coming from the east. The radar contact was coming from the north. The Japanese perspective, final approach. Meanwhile, in the skies north of Oahu, the Japanese first wave is approaching. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida is leading 183 aircraft toward the island high-level bombers, dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo planes. They've been flying for 90 minutes, and Fuchida is nervous. The entire plan depends on surprise. If the Americans detect them early, if their carriers are gone, if fighters get airborne, the whole mission collapses. The weather is terrible. Heavy clouds. He can't see the ocean below. Then, at 7:40 a.m., they break through the clouds. And there it is, Oahu. Fuchida looks through his binoculars. Every American battleship is in the harbor. All of them, lined up perfectly. Cold engines. No aircraft circling. No signs of alertness whatsoever. They have achieved total surprise. Fuchida radios back to the carriers. Tora, Tora, Tora. Tiger, Tiger, Tiger. The code phrase confirming complete surprise. The calm before the storm. Back on the ground, it's a beautiful Hawaiian morning. 7:45 a.m. On the USS Arizona, sailors are eating breakfast in the mess hall. On the USS Oklahoma, the morning watch is changing. On Ford Island, mechanics are preparing aircraft for routine patrol flights. At Hickam Field, Army Air Corps personnel are heading in for Sunday duty. At the submarine base, players are getting ready for a morning baseball game. Everything is normal. Everything is quiet. 8 battleships sit in 2 neat rows, what sailors call Battleship Row. From north to south, Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, West Virginia, Maryland, Oklahoma, California. And across the channel, the Pennsylvania sits in dry dock. The most powerful naval force on Earth, and they have exactly 3 minutes left. High above, the first Japanese planes are approaching. 10,000 feet, 9,000. Getting lower, Fuchida's bomber is lining up its run. 7:48 a.m., he gives the order. A bomb is released. It falls, and everything changes. 7:48 a.m., the first bombs hit the seaplane base on Ford Island. Hangars erupt in flames. Aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip lined up to prevent sabotage become perfect targets. The first American planes are destroyed before they ever leave the ground. Seconds later, the torpedo bombers come in. They are flying 50 feet above the water. Some are so low, witnesses say they could see the pilots' faces. Remember, Pearl Harbor is only 40 feet deep. Normal torpedoes would just plow into the mud, but the Japanese modified theirs with wooden fins and a shallow run depth. They had been planning this for a year, and now those torpedoes are heading straight for Battleship Row. The U.S. Oklahoma is hit first. 1 torpedo, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. The ship starts to roll. Now, imagine you are below deck. The lights go out. Water is pouring in. The entire ship is tilting sideways. You are running uphill as the ship capsizes. Men are scrambling through hatches, up ladders, and through passageways that are rapidly filling with water. Some make it, most don't. 8 minutes. That is how long it takes for the Oklahoma to completely capsize. 429 men are trapped inside, and you can hear them banging on the hull from the inside. Rescue crews will spend the next 3 days trying to cut them out. They will save only 32. But the Oklahoma isn't the worst of it. At 8:06 a.m., just 18 minutes into the attack, something happens that will become the defining image of Pearl Harbor. The Japanese high-level bomber, flying at 10,000 feet, releases a modified 16-inch naval shell. It is 1,760 pounds of armor-piercing death, and it is falling directly toward the USS Arizona. The bomb punches through the forward deck. It penetrates deep into the ship, into the forward ammunition magazine, where over 1 million pounds of gunpowder is stored. The explosion is so massive, it is felt miles away. The blast is so powerful it lifts the entire 32,000-ton battleship out of the water. The forward turrets, each weighing 500 tons, are blown completely off the ship. The Arizona sinks in 9 minutes. 1,177 men die. That is more than half of all American deaths that day. On one ship, in 9 minutes. To this day, the Arizona still sits on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Over 900 men are still entombed inside. And the Arizona isn't alone. Across the harbor, it is complete chaos. The U.S. West Virginia takes 6 torpedoes. She is sinking, but her captain Mervyn Bennion stays at his post. Even after a bomb fragment tears through his abdomen, he refuses to leave. He is still giving orders when he dies. The U.S. California is hit by 2 torpedoes. She is flooding, listing, and going down. The U.S. Nevada, the only battleship to get underway, tries to escape. She is on fire and under heavy attack, but she is fighting back. Her crew is trying to reach the open sea, but if she sinks in the harbor channel, she will block the entire fleet for months. Japanese dive bombers swarm her. 6 bombs hit in rapid succession. She is forced to beach herself to avoid blocking the channel. But here is what the Japanese didn't count on. Americans don't give up. Within minutes of the first attack, sailors are manning guns. Some are still in their pajamas, some are wounded. They are fighting back anyway. Ensign Joe Tausig loses his leg when a bomb hits his position, yet he refuses morphine so he can keep directing his guns. Chief Boatswain John Finn sets up a machine gun in the middle of the runway, completely exposed. He is hit 21 times, but he keeps firing. Doris Miller, a mess attendant on the West Virginia, carries wounded sailors to safety. Then he mans a .50 caliber machine gun, a weapon he had never been trained on because of segregation. He shoots down at least 2 Japanese planes and will become the first African American to receive the Navy Cross. By 8:25 a.m., the harbor is a scene of absolute devastation. Battleship Row is an inferno. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks is burning on the surface of the water. Men are jumping from sinking ships into water that is literally on fire. Rescue boats are pulling survivors from the flames. The sky is black with smoke, visible from 100 miles away. At 9:45 a.m., the first wave pulls back. They have been attacking for less than an hour, but the damage is catastrophic. 4 battleships sunk, 4 more heavily damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, over 2,000 sailors killed, and then radar picks up a new contact. The second wave is inbound, 171 aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki. But this time, the Americans are ready. Every gun that can still fire is pointed at the sky. The entire harbor is putting up a wall of lead. And it's working. The second wave takes heavy casualties. 20 Japanese aircraft are shot down, compared to just 9 in the first wave. From the Japanese perspective, everything has changed. The element of surprise is gone. The harbor is obscured by thick black smoke. Targets are harder to identify, and anti-aircraft fire is everywhere. Most of the primary targets, the battleships, are already destroyed. So, the second wave shifts focus. Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, and Kaneohe Naval Air Station. They are targeting what is left of American air power. Dive bombers and fighters strafe the airfields. More hangars explode, more planes burn. By the time it's over, 188 American aircraft are destroyed. Only 43 are left operational. But a handful of American pilots managed to get airborne. Second Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth Taylor raced to Halewa Field in their car, still in their tuxedos from the night before. They take off in P-40 Warhawks and immediately engage the Japanese. Between them, they shoot down 6 enemy aircraft. Against impossible odds, outnumbered 50-1, they fought back. At 10 a.m., the second wave pulls back. The attack is over. 2 hours. That's all it took. Let's look at the final numbers. American losses: 2,403 killed and 1,178 wounded. 4 battleships sunk, 4 battleships damaged, 3 cruisers damaged, 3 destroyers damaged, and 188 aircraft destroyed. In 2 hours, the Japanese had crippled the Pacific Fleet. Japanese losses: 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, and 64 men. It wasn't even close. This was one of the most lopsided military victories in history. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because, for all the destruction, the Japanese missed the most important targets. See the oil storage facilities? They held 4.5 million barrels of fuel. If the Japanese had destroyed these, the Pacific Fleet would have had to retreat to California. Every ship would have had to sail 2,000 miles for fuel. The war in the Pacific would have been delayed by years. They didn't touch them. And the shipyards, the repair facilities and dry docks, these are what would allow the U.S. to repair those damaged battleships. The West Virginia, the California, and the Nevada would all be back in service within 2 years because the repair facilities survived. But the biggest mistake? The carriers. On December 7th, the Pacific Fleet had 3 aircraft carriers: the USS Enterprise, the U.S. Lexington, the U.S. Saratoga. None of them were at Pearl Harbor. The Enterprise was returning from Wake Island, the Lexington was near Midway, and the Saratoga was in San Diego. The Japanese sank the battleships, but they missed the carriers. And in the new kind of warfare that was coming, carrier warfare, battleships were already obsolete. The Japanese had won the battle, but they had failed to win the war. Admiral Nagumo faces a decision. His officers are urging him to launch a third wave. Commander Fuchida is practically begging, "We need to destroy the fuel tanks, the repair facilities, and we need to find those carriers." But Nagumo refuses. His reasoning: they had achieved their primary objective. They had lost the element of surprise. American defenses were fully alert, and they didn't know where the U.S. carriers were. That last point terrifies him. If those carriers found his fleet while he was recovering aircraft, he could lose everything. So at 1 p.m., the Japanese fleet turns for home. It was the right tactical decision, but it might have cost Japan the war. Back in the United States, news of the attack is spreading. The nation is in shock. But shock quickly turns to something else. Recruitment centers are overwhelmed. Lines stretch around the block. Young men who had no interest in the war yesterday are enlisting by the thousands. Within months, American industry will shift to total war production. The arsenal of democracy is awakening. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, reportedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether he actually said it or not, he was right. Over the next 4 years, the U.S. would build 141 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, 807 cruisers and destroyers, 203 submarines, and 300,000 aircraft. Japan's entire pre-war navy was less than what America built in 1943 alone. Pearl Harbor wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The next day, President Franklin Roosevelt addresses a joint session of Congress. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The vote for war in the Senate was 82-0. In the House, it was 388-1. The lone dissenting vote came from Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana, a pacifist who voted her conscience. Everyone else was united. America was at war. So what did Pearl Harbor actually accomplish? For Japan, tactically, it was a masterpiece. But strategically, it was a disaster. They failed to destroy the most important targets, which meant America could recover quickly. They united American public opinion overnight before the attack. Americans were divided. After, there was 82% approval for war. 6 months later, at the Battle of Midway, those carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor destroyed 4 Japanese carriers, the Akagi, Kagi, Soryu, and Hiryu. The same ships that launched the Pearl Harbor attack were gone. The tide turned, and it never turned back. Today, over 80 years later, the USS Arizona still rests on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Oil still leaks from her hull 9 drops per minute. They call them the Tears of the Arizona. The memorial lists 1,177 names, each one a son, a brother, a father, a husband. So what can we learn? First, intelligence is useless without action. The U.S. had warnings, but complacency meant nothing was done. Second, tactical victories don't guarantee strategic success. Japan won the battle, but guaranteed their own defeat by bringing America into the conflict. Third, peace doesn't mean you stop preparing. Finally, never underestimate the resolve of a nation under attack. Japan thought Pearl Harbor would break American will. Instead, it forged it. December 7, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. 2,403 Americans died that day, but their sacrifice wasn't in vain. They became the spark that ignited the arsenal of democracy. Today, Pearl Harbor is once again home to the Pacific Fleet. Life continues, but beneath the waves, the Arizona remains a permanent reminder of the price of unpreparedness and a testament to those who gave everything on one terrible morning in paradise. Rest in peace, gentlemen. We remember. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button. We're covering the biggest battles in history, one story at a time. And remember, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. See you in the next one.